His tiny paws were covered in mud, his fur was soaked from the morning rain, but every single day, the small German Shepherd puppy would appear at Sarah Mitchell's grave, sitting patiently beside the freshly placed flowers as if waiting for someone who would never return. The cemetery caretaker first noticed the loyal pup 3 days after the funeral, wondering how such a young dog could find its way through the maze of headstones to the exact same spot. Without fail, for weeks, the mysterious puppy continued his daily visits, touching the hearts of everyone who witnessed his dedication. Some visitors began leaving treats and water, yet no one knew where he came from or why he seemed so connected to a 26-year-old woman who had died tragically in a hiking accident. The story might have remained just a curious local phenomenon, until Sarah's devastated parents decided to install a small camera near their daughter's grave. What they discovered would reveal a connection so profound and unexpected that it would change their lives forever if you believe in the extraordinary. Bonds between animals and humans. Please subscribe to our channel now for more heartwarming stories that remind us there's more to this world than we can explain. Frank Mason had worked as the caretaker at Pinewood Memorial Gardens for almost 2 decades. His weathered hands had tended countless graves through all seasons, rain or shine, maintaining the sacred ground where families laid their loved ones to rest. At 62, he'd seen his share of grief, the endless variations of human sorrow, but there was something about this puppy's dedication that touched even his seasoned heart. That first morning, when he spotted the small German Shepherd pup sitting motionless beside Sarah Mitchell's fresh grave, he thought it was just a stray that had wandered in through the broken section of fence he needed to repair. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle the animal, but before he could get within 20 feet, the puppy darted away. Disappearing among the headstones, Frank shrugged and continued his rounds, thinking nothing more of it. But the next morning, the puppy was back in the exact same spot, head slightly tilted as if listening for something. Only it could hear. Frank observed from a distance, this time, noticing how the animal's attention never wavered from the gravesite. The polished granite, still adorned with funeral flowers, beginning to wilt in the summer heat. By the 3rd day, Frank became truly curious. The puppy's routine seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic, arriving shortly after dawn, sitting beside the headstone for approximately 30 minutes, then disappearing into the wooded area that bordered the eastern edge of the cemetery. Frank had attended Sarah Mitchell's funeral just a week earlier, a somber affair with a surprisingly large turnout for someone so young. He remembered the parents shell-shocked and hollow-eyed as they accepted condolences from a line of mourners that stretched back to the cemetery gates. Sarah had been only 26 when she died a hiking accident. According to the brief obituary that Frank had read in the local paper, she had apparently slipped from a trail at Eagles Peak, falling nearly 60 feet. Frank had seen too many young lives memorialized in stone not to feel the particular sting of a death that came decades too soon. But he hadn't known anything else about Sarah Mitchell until the puppy's appearances prompted him to learn more. During a slow afternoon, Frank found himself standing before her headstone, reading the inscription that her parents had chosen: "Beloved daughter, friend, and protector of all creatures great and small, taken too soon, but forever in our hearts." The dates revealed a life spanning just 26 years, 4 months, and 12 days. Below the formal text, someone had added a small etched paw print, a detail Frank hadn't noticed before. "Excuse me, are you the caretaker?" Frank turned to find a middle-aged woman holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, her eyes red-rimmed with recent grief. "Yes, ma'am. Frank Mason." He introduced himself. "I'm Karen Weston. I was Sarah's supervisor at the emergency response unit." She gestured to the grave. "I just wanted to bring these she loved." Wildflowers said they were survivors, just like the people we tried to help. Frank nodded. "I've been noticing a small German Shepherd puppy visiting her grave every morning. Did Sarah have a dog?" Karen looked surprised. "Not that I know of, But that would be just like Sarah to have a connection with an animal that none of us knew about. She was special that way. Her voice caught. We lost our best paramedic when we lost her, but more than that, we lost the heart of our team. As Karen arranged her wildflowers among the more formal funeral arrangements, she spoke of Sarah, describing a young woman who had dedicated her life to saving others, who worked extra shifts during disasters, who could calm the most panicked patients with her steady voice and gentle touch. Sarah, it seemed, had been extraordinary in the most understated ways, carrying an inner light that only fully revealed itself in crisis. She volunteered at the animal shelter on her days off, Karen continued, said working with the animals balanced out the intensity of emergency response. She had a way with the ones no one could reach, the traumatized ones, the biters, the fearful ones. Something about her just put them at ease. Frank thought about the puppy, its determined visits, its focused attention. Do you think someone from the shelter might know about a dog connected to her? Karen considered this. Possibly the shelter director, Lisa Johnson. They were close. Sarah spent a lot of time there, especially in her final months. She glanced at her watch. I should go, but please let Sarah's parents know about the puppy. I think it would mean a lot to them. Robert and Ellen, they're devastated, as you can imagine. After Karen left, Frank remained by the grave, thinking about Sarah Mitchell. The fragments of her life coming together like pieces of a mosaic. A young woman who saved lives, both human and animal, who found wildflowers beautiful for their resilience, who had somehow inspired such devotion in a small German shepherd puppy that it navigated through a cemetery each day to sit beside her final resting place. Frank didn't consider himself particularly sentimental. His job had taught him that death was simply part of life's cycle. But there was something about this situation that stirred his curiosity. He made a mental note to mention the puppy to Sarah's parents if they visited again, and perhaps to contact the animal shelter himself the next morning. Frank arrived at work earlier than usual, determined to learn more about the mysterious visitor. Sure enough, at precisely 7:15 a.m., the small German shepherd appeared from the direction of the woods, moving with purpose through the gravestones until it reached Sarah's plot. The morning dew soaked its fur as it settled into its now familiar position beside the headstone. Frank watched from behind a nearby mausoleum, observing how the puppy occasionally whined, softly nudging the ground with its nose. He had brought some dog treats purchased the previous evening, and slowly approached, speaking in a low, gentle voice. Hey there, little one. It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. But as before, when he got within 20 feet, the puppy startled, its ears flattening against its head before it bolted, disappearing once again into the woods. Frank sighed, placing a few treats on the ground near the grave. Maybe tomorrow the puppy would allow him closer. Maybe tomorrow he would begin to understand. The connection between this loyal animal and the young woman whose life had been cut tragically short. What Frank couldn't know was that the mystery was just beginning, and that the story of Sarah Mitchell and the devoted puppy would soon touch far more lives than he could imagine. Over the next 2 weeks, Frank developed a routine around the puppy's visits, arriving early enough to witness its appearance and departing late enough to confirm it had gone. Each day he left fresh water and dog food near Sarah's headstone, and each day he found the offerings consumed, though he never managed to catch the puppy in the act of eating them after several failed attempts to approach the animal. Frank decided on a different strategy: patience and observation. He began keeping a journal documenting the puppy's behavior. On day June 7th, arrived 7:14 a.m., departed 7:43 a.m., sat facing headstone, occasionally pawing at ground, brought ball, dropped it twice by flowers. Tuesday, June 8th, arrived 7:16 a.m., stayed until 7:40 a.m., rain. Today, fur completely soaked, didn't seem to notice. His notes continued day after day, recording a pattern of devotion that remained consistent regardless of weather. Frank wasn't the only one who had noticed the puppy's vigil. Mrs. Harris, an elderly woman who visited her husband's grave every Thursday, began bringing special treats, premium dog biscuits, that she left in a small plastic container to keep them dry. "My George loved animals," she told Frank one morning. "He would have appreciated this little one's loyalty. Reminds me of the stories about Greyfriars." Bobby word spread among the regular cemetery visitors, the story of the faithful puppy becoming something of a local legend. Soon others began leaving offerings, a small water-resistant dog bed appeared one day, a weatherproof toy the next. Frank watched with amusement and a touch of concern as the gravesite began to accumulate these gifts, though he made sure to remove anything that might be considered disrespectful, becoming. "Quite the shrine," remarked John Perkins, the florist, who delivered fresh arrangements to various graves twice weekly, between the flowers for the young lady and the gifts for her pup. Frank nodded. "People are touched by loyalty, especially when it comes from an animal, makes them feel there's still something pure in the world, I suppose." One morning in late June, Frank arrived to find a local news van parked at the cemetery entrance. His heart sank. Someone had apparently tipped off the media. About the story, he politely but firmly asked them to leave, explaining that they would need permission from the Mitchell family before filming on cemetery grounds. Reluctantly, they departed, but Frank knew it was only a matter of time before the story spread further. That same afternoon, he spotted an unfamiliar couple standing before Sarah's grave. The woman was weeping softly, while the man stood with his arm around her shoulders, his own expression frozen in grief. Frank approached them. Gently, "Excuse me," he said. "I'm Frank Mason. The caretaker here?" The man turned, extending his hand. "Robert Mitchell, this is my wife Ellen. We're Sarah's parents." Frank shook their hands. "I'm very sorry for your loss. I was actually hoping to speak with you. There's something you should know about your daughter's grave." Ellen Mitchell looked up, alarmed. "Has there been vandalism?" "No, nothing like that," Frank assured her quickly. "Actually, it's something quite remarkable. For the past 3 weeks, a small German Shepherd puppy has been visiting Sarah's grave every morning. Like clockwork, stays about half an hour, then leaves." The Mitchells exchanged puzzled glances. "A puppy?" Robert asked. "Are you certain it's coming specifically for Sarah?" Frank nodded. "No doubt about it. Comes directly to her grave, sits in the same spot every day, sometimes brings a small toy. Many visitors have noticed it's become something of a special thing around here. People leave treats, water." Ellen's expression shifted from confusion to wonder. Sarah loved animals, especially dogs. She volunteered at the shelter whenever she could. Her voice broke. "But we didn't know of any particular dog in her life recently she never mentioned." "I thought you might want to see for yourself," Frank suggested. "The puppy comes every morning around 7:15, stays until about 7:45. Robert nodded slowly. "We'd very much like to see that. Thank you for telling us." The following morning, Frank arrived at 6:30 to find the Mitchells already waiting by their daughter's grave. They had brought folding chairs and a thermos of coffee prepared for their vigil. Frank showed them a secluded spot behind a large oak tree where they could observe without being immediately visible to the puppy. "He's very skittish," Frank explained. "Won't come close if he sees people watching." Precisely at 7:16, the small German Shepherd appeared from the eastern woods, just as it had every day for weeks, Frank heard. Ellen Mitchell's sharp intake of breath as the puppy made its way purposefully through the gravestones, stopping at Sarah's. He watched the Mitchells' faces as they observed the animal's ritual, the way it circled the grave twice before settling down, the gentle whine it made as it pressed its nose against the earth. "Oh, Robert," Ellen whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look how small it is, just a baby, really." The puppy had brought its ball again, dropping it beside the flowers before, nudging it with its nose as if inviting someone to play for nearly 30 minutes. They watched in silence as the puppy maintained its vigil, occasionally rising to circle the grave, before settling again finally, as if following some internal clock. The puppy stood, picked up its ball, and trotted back toward the woods, disappearing among the trees. Ellen was openly weeping now. Robert's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't understand," he said. his voice rough with emotion. "Sarah never mentioned." "A puppy, she would have told us. Perhaps there's someone at the animal shelter who might know," Frank suggested. "I understand she spent a lot of time there." Robert nodded. "We haven't been able to face going through her things yet, or talking to her. Friends, it's been—" He trailed off, too painful, Ellen finished for him. "But this feels like a message. Somehow, doesn't it? Like she's trying to tell us something." Frank had witnessed enough grief to recognize the desperate search for meaning that often accompanied loss, the need to find signs and connections that might bridge the unbridgeable gap between the living and the dead. He didn't want to encourage false hope. Yet there was undeniably something extraordinary about the puppy's dedication. Would it be possible? Robert asked hesitantly. To set up some kind of camera? To watch when we can't be here? Frank considered this. Cemetery policy usually prohibits surveillance equipment, but in this case, I think we could make an exception as long as it's discreet and temporary. Over the next few days, Robert Mitchell returned with a small weatherproof camera designed for wildlife observation. With Frank's help, he positioned it carefully among the flowers on Sarah's grave, angling it to capture any visits without being immediately noticeable. The camera was motion-activated and would send images directly to Robert's phone. A week passed, the puppy continuing its faithful visits unaware of being observed. Frank noticed that the Mitchells now came to the cemetery every afternoon, checking the camera, reviewing footage. Robert had begun bringing his laptop, cataloging the puppy's behaviors, creating a timeline. Ellen, meanwhile, had started reaching out to Sarah's friends and colleagues, trying to piece together any connection to the mysterious visitor. "We've spoken to Lisa at the animal shelter," Ellen told Frank one afternoon. "Sarah was working with some rescue dogs in the weeks before her accident, but Lisa doesn't recall any particular German Shepherd puppy still. She's checking their records." Frank nodded encouragingly, touched by the way this mystery had given the grieving parents a focus for their energy, a purpose amid their pain. The puppy's devotion had sparked something beyond mere curiosity. It had kindled a tiny flame of hope. Not that their daughter would return, but that some piece of her story remained untold. Some final chapter waiting to be discovered. "Whatever happens," Frank said gently, "that little one has already given you a gift, hasn't he? A reminder of how your daughter touched lives, even those we might not expect." Ellen smiled through her tears. "Yes, that's exactly it, Frank. Sarah always said, animals know things we don't. They see with different eyes, maybe. This puppy sees something at her grave that we can't. Maybe it's not about the past at all, but about something still present, something still here." As Frank watched the Mitchells walk hand in hand back to their car, he wondered if Ellen might be right, if the mysterious puppy was somehow perceiving something beyond human understanding. What he couldn't yet know was how close they were to discovering the truth, a truth that would bring both heartbreak and healing in equal measure. The Mitchells' home stood quiet on Maple Street, the kind of silence that follows catastrophe, heavy and persistent, like fog that refuses to lift. It had been 6 weeks since Sarah's death, but to Robert and Ellen, it might as well have been yesterday. Grief had its own calendar, its own clock marking time in moments of remembering and forgetting, in sudden tears and unexpected laughter, in the terrible shock of waking each morning to the same devastating reality. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by Sarah's things, items they had finally forced themselves to bring home from her apartment, her paramedic badge photos from hiking trips, a collection of animal figurines, birthday cards. She had saved a half-used bottle of her favorite perfume. Ellen lifted this last item to her nose, inhaling deeply, eyes closed, as if she could summon her daughter through scent alone. "I made some coffee," Robert said, placing a mug beside her, his own grief evident in the new lines etched around his eyes and the silver that had appeared in his dark hair almost overnight. "Thank you," Ellen murmured, her fingers still wrapped around the perfume bottle. "I keep thinking about that puppy. Robert, why would it come to her grave every day? How would it even know where to find her? Robert sat across from her, his hands cradling his mug. I don't know, maybe it belonged to someone who attended the funeral, followed their scent there, and somehow imprinted on the location. Ellen shook her head, unconvinced. That doesn't explain why it keeps coming back or why it brings toys. Frank said it brought that little ball again yesterday. They had been having variations of this conversation for days. The mystery of the devoted puppy providing a focus for their grief, a puzzle that distracted them, however briefly, from the larger, incomprehensible loss they had suffered. Robert checked his phone, reviewing the latest images from the cemetery camera. Close-ups of the German Shepherd puppy, its expression somehow solemn as it sat beside the headstone. We should talk to more of Sarah's friends, Ellen suggested. Someone must know something about this dog. Robert nodded, though they had already spoken. With Sarah's closest friends, her roommate from college, her co-workers at the emergency response unit, even her ex-boyfriend Michael. No one remembered Sarah mentioning a German Shepherd puppy. It was as if the animal had appeared from nowhere. Its connection to their daughter, a mystery that deepened with each passing day. The shelter director, Lisa Johnson, called yesterday while you were out. Ellen said, she's still looking through their records, but says Sarah was involved with a pregnant rescue dog a few months ago, some kind of mixed breed. Mother and puppies were placed with a foster family after they were born. She's trying to track down more information. Robert felt a flicker of hope. That could be something, maybe one of those puppies. Maybe, Ellen agreed, not wanting to dismiss any possibility. No matter how remote, their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Robert rose to answer it, returning moments later with Karen Weston, Sarah's supervisor, from the emergency unit, who had brought a casserole and concerned eyes. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, as Ellen invited her to sit. I just wanted to check on you both and bring this. It's not much, but it's very kind, thank you, Ellen assured her. Would you like some coffee? As Robert poured another cup, Ellen found herself studying Karen's face, searching for reflections of Sarah, for hints of shared experiences. The woman had spent countless hours with their daughter during her final years in ways Ellen and Robert hadn't. They had known Sarah's childhood, her formative years, but Karen had known Sarah the paramedic, Sarah the professional adult. Frank, the cemetery caretaker, told me about the puppy, Karen said, accepting the coffee. Have you learned anything more? Ellen shook her head. Nothing concrete yet. We've asked everyone we can think of, but no one seems to know of any connection between Sarah and a German Shepherd puppy. It's strange, Karen agreed. Sarah loved talking about the animals she worked with at the shelter. She would show us pictures, bring stories to work about the difficult cases, the breakthroughs. If she had a special connection with this puppy, I think she would have mentioned it. Robert clicked through the camera images on his phone, showing Karen the clearest shots. He's quite young from what we can tell, maybe 6 months old at most. German Shepherd mix probably. Karen studied the photos, her brow furrowed in concentration. You know this might be a long shot, but have you talked to Dr. Miller? He was Sarah's veterinarian. She volunteered at his clinic sometimes. Helping with the shelter animals would bring strays there occasionally. Ellen and Robert exchanged glances. We didn't think of that, Ellen admitted. Do you have his contact information? Karen nodded, pulling out her phone. I should have mentioned it sooner. Sarah talked about him. Often said he was the best vet in the county, especially with traumatized animals. As Karen wrote down the clinic's address and phone number, Ellen felt the familiar surge of conflicting emotions that accompanied any new information about Sarah. Pride in discovering another facet of their daughters, compassionate life pain at the reminder of all they had lost, anxiety that this lead like others before it might ultimately lead nowhere. After Karen left, promising to continue thinking about other possible connections, Robert called the veterinary clinic, learning that Dr. Miller was fully booked for the day, but could see them tomorrow morning. Ellen, meanwhile, returned to sorting through Sarah's belongings, a task that felt both necessary and impossible. Each item a landmine of memory. I keep it, expecting to find a note or a photo, something that would explain, Ellen said. holding up Sarah's day planner. But there's nothing about a puppy here, just her usual appointments. Shifts at the response unit, volunteer hours at the shelter, Roberts. Joined her at the table, gently taking the planner. We'll figure it out, Ellen, one way or another. We'll understand why this puppy comes to her grave. Do you think we're being foolish? Ellen asked, suddenly vulnerable, chasing after this mystery. As if it will somehow bring her back or make her death meaningful? Robert considered the question with the careful thoughtfulness that had drawn Ellen to him 30 years earlier. I think, he said finally, that grief needs anchors, places to attach itself, so it doesn't drown us. I think this puppy is giving us something to focus on beyond our pain, and whether or not we ever solve the mystery, that focus is helping us survive each day. Ellen nodded, tears forming. I miss her so much, Robert. It doesn't get easier. It just gets different. I know, he said simply, drawing her into his arms, his own grief merging with hers in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by their daughter's things. That night, Ellen dreamed of Sarah hiking along a mountain trail. Laughing over her shoulder, a small German Shepherd puppy bounding along beside her. Ellen called out, trying to warn them about the dangerous path ahead, but her voice made no sound. The dream shifting suddenly to Sarah's grave, where the puppy sat. Alone in the rain, waiting for someone who would never return, Ellen woke, gasping, her pillow wet with tears. Robert's arm tightened around her, wordlessly acknowledging her pain. I need to see it again, Ellen whispered. The puppy, I need to be there. When it visits, Robert checked the bedside clock. It's 5:30. If we hurry, we can make it before he arrives. They dressed quickly. Driving through the pre-dawn stillness to Pinewood Memorial Gardens, Frank was already there, opening the gates. As they pulled up, he nodded in silent understanding, leading them to the secluded spot behind the oak tree where they could observe without being seen. Right on schedule, Frank murmured, as the small German Shepherd appeared from the trees. Its path now, worn through the dewy grass, never misses a day. Ellen watched the puppy's ritual with fresh eyes, noticing details she had missed in the camera footage, the careful way it circled the grave, the gentle whine when it pressed its nose to the ground. Most striking was the puppy's expression, a focus and intention that seemed impossible for an animal so young. It's like it's listening, she whispered, like it expects her to answer, as the sun rose higher, illuminating the cemetery in golden light. Ellen felt something shift within her, not healing exactly, but a subtle realignment of her grief, as if the puppy's faithful presence was teaching her something about love, about devotion, about continuing to show up day after day, even when there was no answer, even when hope seemed foolish. Beside her, Robert squeezed her hand, their shared pain momentarily transformed by the simple, pure devotion of a small German Shepherd puppy who somehow knew to come to this place every day to wait for someone who had touched its life, however briefly, however mysteriously. Dr. Miller's veterinary clinic occupied a converted Victorian house at the edge of town, its wraparound porch filled with people and their pets waiting for morning appointments. Robert and Ellen arrived just as the clinic opened, finding the waiting room already bustling with activity, the walls covered with photos of successfully treated animals, thank you cards from grateful owners, and educational posters about pet care. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell. A young receptionist called Dr. Miller can see. You know, they followed her down a hallway lined with examination rooms to a small office at the back where a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes rose to greet them. Robert, Ellen, please come in. I'm so sorry about Sarah. She was a remarkable young woman. Ellen felt the familiar tightness in her throat that accompanied any mention of Sarah. Thank you, doctor. She spoke highly of you as well. Please call me James. He gestured to chairs across from his desk. Karen mentioned, you wanted to speak with me about a German Shepherd puppy? Robert nodded, pulling out his phone. For the past several weeks, this puppy has been visiting Sarah's grave every morning, like clockwork. We've been trying to understand why. Dr. Miller studied the images, his expression thoughtful. Interesting, very young. Maybe 5 or 6 months old, looks healthy, though a bit thin. Did Sarah ever bring this puppy to your clinic? Ellen asked Hope, evident in her voice. Or mention anything about a German shepherd? The veterinarian leaned back in his chair. Sarah brought in many animals over the years, strays, injured wildlife animals from the shelter that needed special care. He shook his head. But I don't recall a German shepherd puppy specifically. Not in recent months, but let me check our records. He turned to his computer, typing quickly, scrolling through files. Here's everything with Sarah's name attached, spanning the last year. No German shepherds, several pit bull mixes, a Labrador, retriever with a broken leg, a pregnant beagle that was abandoned. He continued scanning. Nothing that matches your visitor, I'm afraid. Ellen's shoulders slumped, her disappointment palpable. Robert placed a hand on her arm. It was worth checking, thank you for looking. Dr. Miller studied them with compassionate eyes. You know, animals, especially dogs, can form strong attachments quickly. Sarah had a special way with the difficult cases. The ones that were afraid or traumatized, she could connect with them when no one else could. Everyone says that, Ellen murmured, but it doesn't explain how this puppy knows where she's buried or why it comes every day. The camera footage, Dr. Miller said suddenly. May I see more of it? Sometimes behavior can tell us things medical records can't, Robert handed over. His phone bringing up the folder of images and videos they had collected over the past weeks. Dr. Miller scrolled through them, his professional gaze noting details they might have missed. He's very focused. See how his ears are positioned. And that posture that's not random wandering, that's deliberate. What does that mean? Robert asked. It means this puppy is on a mission of sorts, the veterinarian explained. This isn't just a dog that's found a comfortable spot to rest. This is purposeful behavior. And look here, he zoomed in on one image. Do you see that around his neck? Ellen leaned closer. It looks like some kind of tag or charm. Exactly. Dr. Miller nodded. Too small to make out in these images, but it's definitely there could be an ID tag, might have information about who he belongs to. Robert made a note. We'll try to get a better look next time. The camera resolution isn't great. You might consider upgrading your equipment, Dr. Miller suggested. Higher resolution would give us more details about his physical condition, and that tag possibly even scan the area more widely to see where he comes from, where he goes. The conversation shifted to practical considerations about better cameras equipment that could capture clearer images even in low light or adverse weather conditions. Dr. Miller offered recommendations based on what wildlife researchers use to track animal behavior. One more thing, he said as they prepared to leave. Has anyone checked missing pet reports? It's possible this puppy belongs to someone who's searching for him. Robert nodded. Frank, the cemetery caretaker, checked with local animal control. There haven't been any reports matching his description. Curious and curiouser, Dr. Miller mused. Well, please keep me updated. I'd be happy to examine him. If you ever manage to get close enough, safe capture is possible. With the right approach, patience and food usually work wonders. Ellen thanked him, feeling simultaneously disappointed that they hadn't found a direct connection, yet encouraged by his interest and suggestions. As they drove home, she and Robert discussed next steps. We need better equipment. Robert decided, I'll order a higher resolution camera today. Ellen nodded. And we should try to get a closer look at that tag Dr. Miller mentioned. That afternoon, Robert installed a new camera system at Sarah's grave with Frank's help. This one featuring higher resolution multiple angles and better night vision capabilities. The equipment was carefully hidden among the flowers and surrounding vegetation, designed to be unobtrusive while providing comprehensive coverage. This should give us much clearer images, Robert explained to Frank, and wider coverage to see where he comes from where he goes. Frank nodded approvingly. Clever setup, barely noticeable unless you know what to look for. We're going to try capturing him soon, Robert added, not forcefully, just offering food, getting him comfortable with our presence. Dr. Miller says it's possible with patience. Good luck with that, Frank replied skeptically. I've been trying for weeks, haven't gotten within 15 feet yet. The following morning, Robert and Ellen woke early to check the new camera system, the first images downloading to their phones as they sipped coffee in their kitchen. Ellen gasped as the photos appeared on her screen. Robert, look. She turned the phone toward him. You can see the tag. It's definitely there. The higher resolution had captured the small metal disc hanging from the puppy's collar. The images still not clear enough to read any text, but confirming Dr. Miller's observation about the identification tag. There's something else, Robert said, enlarging one particular photo. Look at his ear, the left one. There's a small notch. It could be an injury or a marker, Ellen finished. The shelter sometimes marks rescued animals that way. They continued reviewing the footage, the new camera system revealing details they hadn't been able to see before. The way the puppy sometimes seemed to be searching for something sniffing along the ground around the grave. The fact that occasionally it would press its ear directly against the earth, as if listening the moments when it would suddenly look up, staring intently at something beyond the cameras. View most remarkable was a sequence captured just as the puppy was preparing to leave. It had circled the grave one final time, then sat looking directly at the headstone, almost as if saying goodbye before carefully picking up its ball and trotting away toward the eastern woods. I can't explain it, Ellen said, her voice trembling, but it feels like he knows her, Robert. It feels like there's a connection we're missing. Robert nodded, reviewing the footage that showed the puppy's path as it departed. The new camera caught more of his route. Look, he's heading straight for that break in the trees. I wonder where it leads. We should follow him, Ellen said suddenly. Decisive. Tomorrow morning we'll stay back, not frighten him, but follow at a distance. See where he goes. They spent the rest of the day preparing, gathering supplies that might help them track the puppy without disturbing it. Robert purchased binoculars and downloaded maps of the area surrounding the cemetery, identifying possible routes the puppy might take. Ellen prepared a bag with treats, bottled water, and Sarah's perfume, wondering if the familiar scent might help draw the animal closer. That night, Ellen found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with possibilities, scenarios, explanations for the puppy's behavior. She moved quietly through the house, eventually finding herself in Sarah's old bedroom, untouched since her daughter had moved out years ago now, a shrine of sorts to the girl she had been, rather than the woman she had become. As sitting on the edge of the bed, Ellen opened Sarah's childhood diary, reading entries about school friends. Her first crush, her dream of becoming a doctor, later modified to paramedic entries that revealed a compassionate soul from an early age. Sarah at 10. Writing, I saved a baby bird today. Mom helped me make a nest for it. I named it Hope. The diary entries faded into memory, Ellen recalling Sarah's fierce determination to help others, her absolute certainty, even as a child, that her purpose was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, humans and animals alike. Somewhere in those memories, in the essence of who Sarah had been, lay the answer to the mystery. Ellen felt certain of it. We'll understand soon, she whispered to the framed photo of Sarah on the nightstand. We'll find out why he comes to you, why he waits, I promise. 2 months before her death, Sarah Mitchell stood in the rain holding a flashlight, while Lisa Johnson, director of the county animal shelter, attempted to coax a terrified dog from beneath an abandoned shed. The pregnant German Shepherd mix had been reported by neighbors who had noticed the stray lurking around their properties for several weeks, growing visibly thinner despite their attempts to leave food. Easy girl. It's okay, Sarah crooned, her voice soft and steady, a contrast to the pounding rain and occasional thunder. We're here to help you and your babies. The dog growled low in her throat, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam, her swollen belly nearly touching the ground as she pressed herself further into the shadows. Sarah assessed the situation quickly, noting the dog's matted fur, the way she favored her right front paw, the fear response that spoke of previous mistreatment. She's not coming out voluntarily. Lisa sighed, wiping rain from her face. We might need the catch pole, Sarah. shook her head. "Let me try something first." She set down the flashlight, angling it so it illuminated the space without shining directly in the dog's eyes. Then sat on the muddy ground just beyond the shed's entrance, making herself smaller, less threatening. She began humming softly a lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child. Lisa watched, skeptical but willing to try anything before resorting to the more traumatic catch-pole method. They had already spent over an hour in the downpour. Both women soaked to the skin, dedicated to their mission of rescuing a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with humans. Gradually, Sarah inched closer, still humming, still making herself appear as non-threatening as possible. She extended her hand, palm up, allowing the dog to catch her scent. "Your babies need you, healthy mama, and you need somewhere warm and dry to have them. We can help, if you'll let us." Whether it was Sarah's tone, the exhaustion of pregnancy, or some animal intuition that recognized an ally, the dog's growling subsided her posture, relaxing slightly. Miracle of miracles, she edged forward just enough to sniff Sarah's outstretched fingers. "That's it, good girl," Sarah whispered, maintaining the calm, steady tone that had soothed countless frightened patients throughout her paramedic career. "You're so brave, so strong. Let's get you somewhere safe." 30 minutes later, the German Shepherd mix, now wearing a temporary slip lead, sat in the back of Lisa's van, wrapped in dry towels, still wary, but no longer attempting to escape. Sarah rode in the back with her, maintaining the connection they had established, speaking softly, stroking the dog's head when allowed. "She's severely undernourished," Lisa commented, glancing. "In the rearview mirror, probably been on her own for months while pregnant, poor thing." Sarah nodded. "Her paw needs attention too, looks like an old injury that never healed properly. We should have Dr. Miller check her immediately. At this hour, it's nearly midnight. He gave me his emergency number for cases like this." Sarah was already dialing. "He'll understand when he sees her condition, Dr. James Miller." True to his reputation, met them at his clinic despite the late hour, quickly assessing the rescued dog's condition. "Remarkable that she's survived this long on her own," he commented as he gently examined her severely malnourished, dehydrated, infected paw wound. "And based on her temperature and condition, those puppies could come any day." "Will they survive?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "Hard to say," the veterinarian admitted, "but their chances just improved significantly. Thanks to you two getting her off the streets, she'll need round-the-clock care until she delivers. Someone will need to foster her." "I'll do it," Sarah volunteered without hesitation. "I have experience with whelping from my shelter work, and my schedule is flexible this week." Lisa and Dr. Miller exchanged glances, both knowing Sarah's tendency to take on the most challenging cases, her apartment already housing 2 foster cats and a rehabilitating hawk in a specially designed enclosure on her balcony. "Are you sure?" Lisa asked. "She's going to need intensive care." Sarah was already stroking the dog's head, having established a fragile trust. "I'm sure she's counting on us now. All of them are." The following days saw Sarah transforming her spare bedroom into a whelping area with borrowed equipment from the shelter, her living room becoming a recovery space for the mother dog whom she had named Stella after the character in her favorite play, A Star Among Strays. She explained to Lisa when she came to check on their progress, Stella's health improved rapidly under Sarah's care. The infected paw healing, the matted fur cleaned and brushed, her ribs still showing, but less prominently, as she consumed the special high-calorie diet Dr. Miller had prescribed. Most notably, her demeanor transformed from fearful aggression to cautious acceptance, particularly with Sarah, whom she now followed from room to room when not resting. "She's bonded to you," Lisa observed during a visit 3 days after the rescue. "I've never seen a previously abused dog attach so quickly." Sarah smiled, watching Stella settle onto her new bed. "We understand each other. I think we both know what it's like to be out in the storm, trying to protect others." The labor began 2 days later in the early morning hours. Sarah calling Dr. Miller, who talked her through the process remotely, as Stella delivered 7 puppies over the course of 6 exhausting hours. 6 healthy, 1 stillborn Sarah wept over the tiny, motionless form even as she helped Stella clean and nurse the surviving puppies her paramedic training transitioning seamlessly to midwifery of a different kind. "You did beautifully, Mama," she whispered to Stella as the exhausted dog curled protectively around her newborns. "They're perfect, every one of them." The smallest of the litter, a male with distinctive markings, worried Sarah, initially refusing to nurse. Seeming weaker than his siblings, she supplemented with bottle feeding, setting alarms throughout the night to ensure he received nourishment every 2 hours. Her dedication to this runt matching the intensity she brought to her emergency response work. "This little guy is a fighter," she told Dr. Miller during his home visit to check the puppies. "Reminds me of some of my toughest patients, the ones everyone else gives up on." The veterinarian examined the tiny puppy, noting his weight gain, though still behind his siblings. "He's lucky to have you as his advocate. What are you calling him?" Sarah considered the puppy who had fallen asleep in her palm after his examination. "Scout, he's small but brave like the character from To Kill a Mockingbird." Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah documented the puppy's development with photos and videos, sharing them with shelter staff and her co-workers at the emergency response unit, her apartment becoming a revolving door of visitors eager to see the puppy's progress. Stella growing increasingly comfortable with these carefully supervised interactions, as if understanding these humans were extensions of Sarah, and therefore safe. The smallest puppy, Scout, continued to require extra attention, his development lagging behind his siblings. Though he fought with a determination that endeared him to Sarah, she spent hours with him, specifically ensuring he had access to nursing, holding him against her chest between feedings to provide the warmth and heartbeat that soothed him. "He knows your voice," Lisa commented, watching Scout respond to Sarah's arrival, turning toward her sound before his eyes had fully opened. "I've never seen a newborn puppy so attuned to a human." Sarah smiled, lifting the tiny puppy gently. "We've spent a lot of time together these past weeks. He probably thinks I'm his second mother." As the puppies grew stronger, Sarah began bringing Stella and occasionally 1 or 2 puppies to the shelter for short periods, helping socialize the mother dog while exposing the puppies to new environments. New scents Scout always accompanied her these trips, seemingly thriving on the one-on-one attention, his development accelerating until he nearly matched his siblings. "You've worked a miracle with this little one," Dr. Miller said during a checkup 6 weeks after the birth. "I honestly didn't expect him to survive those first days." Sarah watched Scout exploring the examination room, now confident enough to investigate independently, though still returning to her frequently for reassurance. He just needed someone to believe in him, like all of us do, I suppose. What Sarah couldn't have known then was how the bond she had formed with Scout would transcend even death itself, how the small German Shepherd puppy would carry the imprint of her care, her voice, her scent, into a future where she no longer existed, how he would somehow find his way to the place where she rested, continuing the connection that had begun in those first critical weeks of his life. Had she known, perhaps she would have held him even closer, whispered more secrets into his velvet ears, memorized even more perfectly the feeling of his tiny heart beating against her palm. Instead, she simply loved him day by day, moment by moment, with the same fierce compassion she brought to every living creature that crossed her path, never imagining that their story together was already writing its most extraordinary chapter. Dawn broke over Pinewood Memorial Gardens in a wash of pale gold, the early morning mist still clinging to the ground as Robert and Ellen Mitchell positioned themselves behind a large oak tree near their daughter's grave. They had arrived an hour before the puppy's usual appearance time, bringing camping chairs, a thermos of coffee, and most importantly, a carefully planned strategy for approaching the elusive visitor. "Remember," Robert whispered, checking his watch, "we stay completely silent. Until he's settled, Then I'll circle around from the west while you remain here. If he runs from me, he might run towards you." Ellen nodded, clutching a small bag containing Sarah's unwashed t-shirt and several high-value treats recommended by Dr. Miller. "Do you think the scent will help?" "It might." Robert adjusted his binoculars. Dr. Miller said familiar scents can be powerful triggers for dogs. They waited in tense silence as the cemetery gradually awakened birds beginning their morning chorus. The occasional distant sound of cars on the main road, a groundskeeper's utility vehicle rumbling far on the other side of the property. Frank had given them his blessing for this attempt, even delaying the morning maintenance routine to avoid disturbing their plan at precisely 7:16 a.m., right on schedule. The small German Shepherd puppy appeared from the eastern woods. Following his now familiar path through the gravestones, Robert and Ellen held their breath, watching through binoculars as he approached. Sarah's grave, his movements purposeful, his focus unwavering. "Look at how he moves," Ellen whispered. So determined, the puppy circled the grave twice, as had become his custom, before settling into his usual position beside the headstone he had brought. His ball again placing it carefully among the fresh flowers Frank had arranged the previous evening. The tag on his collar caught the morning light as he tilted his head, appearing to study the engraved name. "Now," Robert breathed, setting aside the binoculars. "Remember the plan." Ellen remained hidden, while Robert began his careful approach, staying low-moving in a wide arc to avoid startling the puppy with direct confrontation. He had studied animal behavior books all week, learning techniques for approaching skittish dogs: the indirect approach, the averted gaze, the non-threatening posture, all designed to minimize fear 15 yards away. Robert paused slowly, sitting on the ground, making himself smaller, less intimidating. He avoided looking directly at the puppy, instead pretending interest in the ground nearby. He began softly humming a technique the book suggested might intrigue rather than frighten a cautious animal. The puppy's ears perked up, immediately swiveling toward the unexpected, sound his body tensing as he registered Robert's presence. But remarkably, he didn't immediately flee, instead watching with evident curiosity, his head tilted to one side. The ball, momentarily forgotten, encouraged Robert, reached slowly into his pocket, withdrawing a treat, holding it in his open palm, still not making direct eye contact. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's okay." The puppy stood, taking a tentative step toward Robert, then freezing indecision evident. In his posture, Robert remained absolutely still, hardly daring to breathe, as the puppy took another hesitant step forward, then another, drawn by curiosity and the scent of the treat from her position behind the oak tree. Ellen watched breathlessly as the distance between her husband and the mysterious visitor decreased yard by yard, the connection forming tentatively fragile as spun glass hope building within her. Maybe, just maybe, they would finally solve the mystery of this devoted animal. Today, then disaster struck in the form of a squirrel darting suddenly across a nearby path. The puppy, startled by the movement, jerked his attention away from Robert, his momentary trust shattered by instinctive fear. Robert lunged forward instinctively, trying to close the distance, but it was exactly the wrong move. The puppy bolted, snatching his ball as he ran. "Ellen!" Robert called. "Your side." Ellen emerged from behind the tree, holding out Sarah's t-shirt, waggling it gently, hoping the familiar scent might override the puppy's fear. It's okay," she called softly, dropping to her knees to appear less threatening. For the briefest moment, the puppy hesitated, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent, his ears pricking forward, recognition flickering in his eyes. Ellen held her breath, hope surging, then crashing as he darted sideways, finding a path between the gravestones that allowed him to avoid both humans while racing back towards the eastern woods. "Damn," Robert muttered as they watched the puppy disappear among the trees. "We were so close." Ellen sighed, her disappointment palpable. "At least we confirmed he recognizes Sarah's scent." Did you see how he reacted to her shirt? He knows it, Robert. He knows her. They gathered there, things discussing what they had learned, what they might do differently next time, both acknowledging that this first attempt, while unsuccessful, had yielded valuable information. The puppy wasn't completely wild, just cautious. They had established partial contact and, most importantly, confirmed that Sarah's scent triggered recognition. Frank joined them as they headed back to their car. No luck, huh? Saw him tearing off toward the woods? Robert shook his head. We almost had him got within about 6 feet before a squirrel spooked him. Progress, though, Frank observed. Took me weeks to get that close. We'll try again, Ellen said with determination. Different approach. Maybe a humane trap like you suggested, Frank nodded thoughtfully. Might work, though, I hate to stress. The little fella seems like he's on an important mission coming here every day. Ellen paused at this perspective. Do you think we're wrong to interfere, Frank? Sometimes I wonder if we should just let him continue his visits without disruption. The caretaker considered the question. Hard to say, ma'am, but that pup is awful young to be on his own, might not survive the winter without help. And whatever his connection to your daughter, something tells me she'd want him safe. This thought accompanied Robert and Ellen as they drove to the animal shelter for their scheduled meeting with Lisa Johnson, the director having learned from the new camera footage and their conversation with Dr. Miller that Sarah had been involved with a pregnant rescue dog. They hoped Lisa might have more detailed records of the puppies and their whereabouts. The shelter occupied a renovated warehouse on the outskirts of town, a cheerful mural of playing animals decorating its exterior, belying the serious work that happened within. Lisa greeted them warmly in the reception area, where volunteers moved purposefully among visitors and animals. I've pulled all of Sarah's volunteer records, she explained, leading them to her office, and I think I may have found something significant. Come see. Her office walls were covered with before and after photos of successful adoptions, certificates of recognition, and children's artwork, thanking the shelter for their new pets. Lisa gestured to her computer where several files were open. Sarah worked extensively with a pregnant German Shepherd mix named Stella, brought in about 2 months before Sarah's accident. She explained, pulling up photos that showed Sarah bottle feeding a tiny puppy. One of the puppies was significantly smaller than the others, required extra care. Sarah called him Scout. Ellen leaned closer, studying the images of her daughter cradling the small puppy, her expression one of complete focus and tenderness. That's her nursing look, she murmured. The same expression she had as a little girl with injured birds or butterflies. Lisa nodded. Sarah had a special connection with this puppy, spent hours with him when others thought he might not survive. She even brought him home separately from the others sometimes to give him extra attention. Robert pointed to one particular photo. Can we see that one enlarged? Lisa clicked on the image, zooming in to show Sarah holding a small German Shepherd puppy. His distinctive markings now clearly visible. Is this your cemetery visitor? She asked. Ellen gasped. Robert, the markings, the ear with the notch. It's him, it has to be. What happened to the puppies? Robert asked, urgency in his voice. Where are they now? Lisa scrolled through additional records. Stella and her puppies were placed with a foster family, the Hendersons, when they were 8 weeks old. Stella has since been adopted, but the records show the puppies were still with the foster family when, she paused delicately, when Sarah's accident occurred. We need to contact these Hendersons immediately, Robert said. Find out what happened to Scout. Lisa was already dialing the phone. I should warn you that foster families don't always keep detailed records of where each puppy goes, especially once they're adopted, but the Hendersons are experienced fosters. If anyone would know, it would be them. As Lisa spoke quietly on the phone, Ellen studied the photos of Sarah with the puppy, her heart both breaking and healing simultaneously. Here was the answer they had been seeking. The connection between their daughter and the faithful cemetery visitor laid bare in images of tender care and dedication. Margaret Henderson says she can "Meet you this afternoon," Lisa announced, hanging up the phone. She remembers Sarah and Scout. Wells says she has information that might explain everything. Robert checked his watch. "We can go right now. Where do they live?" as Lisa wrote down the address. Ellen continued examining the photos, unable to tear herself away from these glimpses of Sarah's final weeks. Her daughter's face animated with purpose and compassion, cradling the tiny life that would later become the mysterious visitor to her. "Grave, she loved him," Ellen said simply, "and somehow he remembers." The Henderson home sat on 3 acres at the edge of Forest Hills, a modest farmhouse surrounded by carefully fenced yards, clearly designed with foster animals in mind. Margaret Henderson, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and weathered hands, greeted Robert and Ellen at the door, her expression compassionate. "Please come in." She gestured toward a comfortable living room where photos of animals covered nearly every surface. "I've been expecting you," Lisa called ahead. "Explained your situation." Ellen's attention was immediately drawn to a large framed photo on the mantel. Sarah kneeling amid a litter of puppies, her smile radiant as she bottle-fed the smallest one. "That's Sarah," she whispered, moving closer. Margaret nodded. "Your daughter was extraordinary. With animals, especially the ones others had given up on. We have that photo up because it reminds us of what dedication truly looks like." Robert and Ellen settled on the couch while Margaret brought coffee and a photo album, which she placed on the coffee table between them. "I understand you've been seeing one of Stella's puppies at your daughter's grave." "Yes," Robert confirmed. "The smallest one, Scout, we believe, based on the markings and what Lisa showed us in Sarah's volunteer records." Margaret opened the album to a section labeled Stella's Miracle Litter, showing the progression of 7 tiny puppies from newborn to playful furballs. Scout was the runt, she explained. Pointing to the noticeably smaller puppy in each image, Sarah refused to give up on him when even Dr. Miller was concerned he might not make it. Ellen traced the image with her finger. "What happened to him after Sarah?" Margaret's expression grew somber. "This is where things get complicated, and where I believe I can explain why Scout has been visiting the cemetery." She took a deep breath. 2 days before Sarah's accident, she came to me with an unusual request. She wanted to adopt Scout herself. Robert and Ellen exchanged surprised glances. She never mentioned wanting to adopt a dog. Ellen said, "We spoke on the phone that week. She said nothing about it. Sarah told me she wanted it to be a surprise." Margaret explained she had just signed a lease on a new apartment that allowed pets, was planning to make Scout her first official adoption, not just a foster she'd already purchased, supplies of crate toys, everything he would need. But the accident happened. Before she could take him home, Robert concluded. Margaret nodded. Exactly the day she was supposed to pick him up permanently was the day after her accident. She turned the page in the album, showing Scout, slightly older, looking forlorn, in a crate. He'd waited for her. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't play with his siblings. It was as if he knew something was wrong. Ellen felt tears forming. She never got to tell him goodbye. "There's more," Margaret said gently. "The day of Sarah's funeral, something extraordinary happened. Scout disappeared from our property. We have secure fencing, especially designed for puppies. But somehow he got out. We searched everywhere, posted flyers called Animal Control." "When was this exactly?" Robert asked, leaning forward. "The morning of Sarah's funeral," Margaret confirmed. "We were actually late to the service because we were searching for him." Robert's eyes widened with realization. "Frank, the cemetery caretaker, said he first noticed the puppy 3 days after the funeral, which means he could have been there even earlier unnoticed," Ellen finished. "Maybe even during the service." Margaret nodded. "We believe he somehow tracked Sarah's scent. She had visited him just days before her accident, spent hours with him, as she always did. German Shepherds have remarkable scent capabilities, and the bond between them was extraordinary. But how would he know to go to the cemetery?" Robert asked the logical part of his mind, struggling with the implications. "And how has he survived? On his own all this time?" Margaret sighed. "As for how he found her, I can only guess. Sarah's scent. following the funeral procession perhaps. As for his survival, he was always resourceful, even as a tiny puppy, and we've put out food for him whenever. We've spotted him in the area, though he's become quite elusive. "You've seen him?" Ellen asked Hope, evident in her voice. "Occasionally," Margaret confirmed, "always at a distance, always heading in the direction of the cemetery we've tried to catch. Him, of course, but he's determined that dog has a mission and nothing will deter him." She rose, crossing to a drawer in the sideboard, extracting a small velvet pouch. "There's something else you should know, something that may explain why Scout's silent connection to Sarah runs so deep." She handed the pouch to Ellen. "Sarah left this with me. The day she asked to adopt, Scout said it was for his collar once he was officially hers." Ellen opened the pouch, tipping the contents into her palm, a small silver tag engraved with the words "Scout and Sarah Forever," and a phone number on the reverse. She showed it to Robert, both of them momentarily speechless at this tangible evidence of their daughter's intentions the night she rescued Stella. The pregnant mother, Margaret continued. "Sarah stayed up all night, helping with the delivery. The smallest puppy Scout was born last. Barely breathing. Sarah performed CPR on him. If you can believe it, tiny chest compressions breathing into that little snout for nearly 20 minutes when everyone else had given up." Ellen closed her eyes, visualizing the scene, her daughter fighting for a tiny life with the same determination she brought to her paramedic work. "Dr. Miller said it was a miracle Scout survived," Margaret went on, "but Sarah just said he wasn't finished yet, that he had important work to do in this world." Their connection was formed in those first moments of his life and strengthened every day after Robert studied the tag. "The puppy we've seen at the cemetery has a tag, but we couldn't make out what was on it in the photos." "It's not this one," Margaret clarified. "Scout had a temporary shelter ID tag when he was here, but Sarah had ordered this special one for when she formally adopted him, so the tag we're seeing in the photos." Ellen began. "Is likely his shelter ID," Margaret confirmed, "which would explain how you might be able to confirm it's definitely him." Robert stood suddenly decisive. "We need to catch him, Margaret, not just to confirm his identity, but for his own safety. He's just a puppy. Still, he shouldn't be living wild, especially with winter coming." Margaret nodded in agreement. "I have a humane trap you can borrow designed specifically for skittish dogs. It's how we've rescued many strays over the years." As Margaret explained the workings of the trap, demonstrating how to set it safely, Ellen found herself returning to the photo of Sarah, with the puppy studying her daughter's expression, the pure joy evident in her face as she cradled the tiny life she had saved. "She was going to give him a home," Ellen said softly. "We should honor that, Robert. We should finish what she started." Robert placed his hand on her shoulder, understanding the implications of her words, the commitment she was suggesting. "Are you sure? Taking on a puppy, especially one that's been through trauma?" Ellen nodded. "I've never been more certain of anything. We'll be giving Sarah's puppy the home she intended for him, and maybe," her voice broke slightly, "maybe he can help us too, help us feel connected to her." Margaret watched this exchange with gentle understanding. Scout is special, not just because of his connection to Sarah, but in his own right. Survivors often are. They have a resilience, a depth of spirit you don't find in those who've had easier paths as they prepared to leave equipped. With Margaret's humane trap detailed instructions and the special tag Sarah had ordered, Ellen felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd experienced since her daughter's death. The mystery that had begun with a faithful puppy visiting a grave was transforming into something unexpected, a continuation of Sarah's legacy, a new chapter rather than merely a conclusion. "Margaret," Ellen asked as they were leaving, "do you think he's been visiting her grave all this time because he's looking for her? Because he doesn't understand where she went?" The older woman considered this, her eyes compassionate. "Animals understand more than we give them credit for, especially about death. I think Scout isn't confused. I think he's keeping a promise in the only way he knows how. Driving home with the trap in their trunk and a new plan forming, Robert and Ellen felt the first genuine hope they'd experienced in months. Not that their grief would disappear, but that it might transform into something else, something that honored Sarah's compassion, her dedication, her belief that every life, even the smallest, most vulnerable, deserved a chance to fulfill its purpose. Dawn had not yet broken when Robert and Ellen arrived at Pinewood Memorial Gardens the following morning. Frank already waiting at the gates, his breath visible in the cold air. Their plan had been meticulously developed over several hours of discussion, with input from Margaret Henderson, Dr. Miller, and Lisa from the shelter, each contributing expertise to maximize their chances of safely capturing Scout. "Everything's ready," Frank informed them, unlocking the gates. "Set up the trap about 20 feet from Sarah's grave, hidden it pretty well with branches and leaves, but left the entrance visible." Robert nodded, examining the setup through binoculars. "Perfect. And you've used the bedding with Sarah's scent? The t-shirt and blanket are inside." "Just like you suggested," Frank confirmed. "Along with those high-value treats Dr. Miller recommended and the toys Margaret said were his favorites, the trap was a humane device designed specifically for capturing skittish dogs. Without injury, a long, rectangular enclosure with a pressure-sensitive plate that would trigger the door to close once the animal was fully inside. They had positioned it carefully, considering Scout's usual approach path while ensuring it wouldn't be immediately visible and trigger his suspicion. "Now we wait," Ellen said, settling onto a folding chair behind a large monument some 30 yards from Sarah's grave. With clear sight lines to both the grave and the trap and hope, they had decided to position themselves farther away than in their previous attempt, having learned that their presence, even at a distance, might deter Scout from his regular routine. Frank had agreed to remain in his maintenance shed, monitoring the situation through binoculars ready to assist once the trap was triggered. The cemetery gradually awakened around them, birds beginning their morning songs, mist rising from the ground, creating an ethereal landscape as gravestones emerged like islands in a pale sea. Ellen found herself holding her breath, checking her watch repeatedly as the scheduled time of Scout's appearance approached. "He's late," she whispered. At 7:20, when the puppy had not yet appeared, "Do you think he sensed something?" Robert squeezed her hand. "Give him time. Animals can be unpredictable. Maybe he found something interesting on his way here." At 7:32, nearly 15 minutes later than usual, movement at the edge of the woods caught their attention. Scout had finally appeared, but something was different. About his approach today, he seemed more cautious, stopping frequently to sniff the air, his path less direct than in previous visits. "He knows something's changed," Robert murmured, watching through the binoculars. The trap must have altered the scents. In the area, Ellen felt her heart sink. Is he going to leave? Not yet, he's still coming, just more carefully. They watched in tense silence as Scout made his way through the gravestones, his usual purposeful trot replaced by a more tentative pace. When he reached Sarah's grave, he circled it repeatedly, sniffing extensively before finally settling in his customary spot, placing his ball among the flowers. "So far, so good," Robert whispered. "Now, we just need him to notice the trap." For several minutes, Scout remained by the headstone, occasionally whining softly, his behavior otherwise unchanged. Then suddenly his head lifted, nostrils flaring as he caught a new scent, the carefully placed lure of Sarah's unwashed t-shirt combined with roasted chicken and liver treats beginning to work. Its magic, Scout stood his attention, now divided between the grave and the direction of the hidden trap. He took a tentative step toward the trap, then stopped, returning to the grave, as if torn between duty and desire. Ellen found herself holding her breath, hardly daring to hope, as the puppy repeated this indecisive pattern several times. "Come on, Scout," she whispered. "It's okay." Whether in response to her barely audible encouragement or the increasingly enticing scent, Scout finally committed to investigating, moving cautiously toward the camouflage trap, pausing frequently to test the air, his entire body alert for danger. He approached the entrance, sniffing intently at the opening, where Sarah's T-shirt was clearly visible inside. "Ah, that's it," Robert encouraged under his breath. "Just a little further." Scout hesitated at the threshold, one paw raised in decision evident in every line of his body, the instinctive caution of a wild creature warring. With the powerful draw of familiar beloved scents for a heart-stopping moment, Ellen thought he would retreat, but then another breeze must have carried the scent more strongly because Scout suddenly pushed forward, entering the trap with determination. Soft click of the mechanism engaging was barely audible, but the effect was immediate. Scout whirled, attempting to exit, finding his path blocked by the now closed door. He barked once in surprise, then began frantically pawing at the enclosure. "Now!" Robert called to Frank as they both rose from their hiding place, hurrying toward the trap. While trying not to further frighten the captured puppy, Scout's panic increased. As he saw humans approaching, his barking becoming more distressed, his efforts to escape more desperate. Ellen's heart ached at his fear, but she steeled herself, knowing this momentary trauma was necessary for his ultimate safety. "Easy, boy, easy," Robert soothed, as they reached the trap, kneeling beside it to appear less threatening. "It's okay, you're safe." Ellen approached. More slowly remembering Margaret's advice about traumatized animals, she sat on the ground near the trap, but not directly facing it, avoiding eye contact that might be perceived as threatening. Instead, she began softly humming the lullaby Sarah had often sung as a child. "We have him," Frank said unnecessarily, the relief in his voice palpable. "What's the next step?" "We need to get him to Dr. Miller's clinic," Robert explained. "He's expecting us. The medical check is the first priority." "How do we move him without causing more distress?" Frank asked. Watching Scout's continued attempts to escape, Ellen reached into her bag, withdrawing another item of Sarah's clothing, a sweater well worn and still carrying her scent. Margaret suggested covering part of the trap with something that smells like Sarah might calm him enough for transport. Gently, she draped the sweater over the top and one side of the trap immediately. Scout's frantic movements slowed his attention, caught by the familiar scent. He pressed his nose against the mesh where the sweater touched the enclosure, inhaling deeply, his posture gradually relaxing. The wariness remained in his eyes. "It's working," Robert whispered, amazed. "Let's give him a few minutes to calm further before we move him." While Scout adjusted to his captivity, Ellen studied him properly for the first time, noting details that hadn't been visible in the camera footage or their distant observations. He was thin, but not dangerously, so his coat, though somewhat dirty, appeared relatively healthy, the distinctive markings matching exactly the photos of the puppy Sarah had saved. Most notably, the tag on his collar was now clearly visible, a small metal disc that caught the morning light. Ellen moved slightly, trying to read the engraving without further alarming Scout. "Can you see what it says?" Robert asked. Ellen squinted. "It's a shelter tag, just like Margaret thought, has a number on it. I think it's the shelter's ID system," carefully following Dr. Miller's instructions. They eventually lifted the trap into Robert's SUV. Scout, now calmer, though still alert, his eyes tracking their every movement. The drive to the veterinary clinic was conducted in near silence, Robert focusing on driving smoothly to minimize stress. Ellen, sitting in the back near the trap, continuing to hum softly. Whenever Scout showed signs of renewed anxiety, Dr. Miller was waiting when they arrived, helping them transfer the trap to an examination room designed for frightened animals with minimal stimulation, soft lighting, and sound-absorbing panels. "Excellent work," he commended, examining the trap setup before turning his attention to Scout. "Let's give him a few minutes to acclimate before we try to handle him." While Scout settled, Dr. Miller reviewed their plan for the examination, explaining each step and what they might expect. "Based on his appearance, he's been surviving reasonably well. but we'll need to check for parasites, malnutrition, and any injuries he might have sustained while living wild. Ellen couldn't take her eyes off the puppy. Now curled in the far corner of the trap, Sarah's t-shirt pulled close to his body. He kept her shirt, she whispered. Look, Robert. Indeed. Scout had managed to grasp Sarah's t-shirt, pulling it protectively against himself. His muzzle buried in the fabric eyes, watchful, but no longer panicked, remarkable. Dr. Miller observed, the bond between them must have been extraordinary for it to persist like this. After nearly 30 minutes of patient waiting, Dr. Miller deemed Scout calm enough to attempt handling the most delicate part of their plan. Carefully, he opened the trap, speaking in soft, reassuring tones, extending his hand with a treat, while Ellen remained nearby with Sarah's sweater. What happened next astonished them all. Instead of retreating further or attempting to bolt, Scout cautiously approached the opening, sniffing Dr. Miller's hand before shifting his attention to Ellen, his nostrils flaring as he caught Sarah's scent on her mother with agonizing slowness. He emerged from the trap, moving directly to Ellen, pressing his nose against her hand, where she had been, holding Sarah's sweater. Oh, Ellen breathed, hardly daring to move, as Scout investigated her, gathering information, connecting scents past and present. Hello, Scout. The puppy looked up at her, Sarah's name, triggering recognition in his intelligent eyes. For a breathtaking moment, Ellen felt as if she were looking at her daughter's soul reflected in that gaze. A connection across the boundary between life and death mediated by this small Loya. Dr. Miller's examination of Scout was thorough but gentle, his experienced hands moving methodically over the puppy's body while Ellen remained close by, offering reassurance and the comfort of Sarah's scent that seemed to keep Scout relatively calm despite the unfamiliar procedures. Overall, he's in surprisingly good condition considering what he's been through, the veterinarian concluded after completing the examination. Slightly underweight, but not dangerously so. No signs of serious disease or injury. Robert, who had been watching anxiously from nearby, released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That's remarkable, given he's been living wild for weeks. German Shepherds are remarkably resilient and intelligent, Dr. Miller explained, preparing a series of vaccinations. And he's young enough to adapt quickly, though old enough to have survived on his own, likely catching small prey and perhaps benefiting from food left by cemetery visitors. Ellen hadn't taken her eyes off Scout during the examination, her hand resting gently on his back. There's a small scar here, she noted, tracing a barely visible line on his shoulder. Was he injured? Dr. Miller examined the area. Good eye, that's a healed wound, probably happened while he was very young, based on how the fur has grown. Over at Margaret might know the story behind it. The examination continued with Scout tolerating blood draws, vaccinations, and parasite treatment. With surprising stoicism, occasionally whining softly but remaining relatively still under Ellen's gentle touch and continuous murmured reassurances. I'd like to keep him overnight for observation, Dr. Miller said as he completed the procedures. Make sure he's properly hydrated and begin a dressing. The mild nutritional deficiencies also gives us time to run some blood tests. Confirm he's completely healthy before you take him home. Take him home. Ellen repeated the words as if testing how they felt. It still seems surreal that we found him, that he's really Sarah's Scout. Speaking of confirmation, Robert said, the tag on his collar, can we check it against the shelter records? Dr. Miller nodded carefully, turning the small metal disc attached to Scout's collar. It's definitely a shelter. I did tag number 8675S, which would have been assigned when he was born or first brought in. Let me call Lisa and confirm. While the veterinarian made the call, Ellen continued stroking Scout, who had finally relaxed enough to lay his head on her lap. His eyes heavy-lidded, though still watchful. She studied his face, the intelligent eyes, the distinctive markings, trying to see what Sarah had seen in this particular puppy. what had drawn her daughter to fight so hard for his survival. Lisa confirms. The tag matches their records for Scout from Stella's litter, Dr. Miller announced, returning from his call. You've definitely found Sarah's puppy. Robert moved closer, kneeling beside Ellen and Scout. DNA testing would be definitive, he suggested, his scientific mind still seeking absolute confirmation. Miller smiled, understanding the need for certainty. We can certainly do that, though it will take a few days for results. The shelter has kept genetic records of all Stella's puppies for their research on outcomes of rescued litters. Scout shifted position, suddenly alert. As Robert's proximity changed the dynamic in the room, Ellen held her breath, fearing the puppy might retreat from this new human contact. But after a moment's hesitation, Scout cautiously extended his muzzle, sniffing Robert's outstretched hand. "Hello there," Robert said softly, holding perfectly still as Scout investigated him. "We've been looking for you for quite some time." To everyone's surprise, Scout moved forward, pressing his head against Robert's hand, a gesture of tentative acceptance that brought tears to Ellen's eyes. The puppy somehow understanding that these humans were connected to his beloved Sarah. "Incredible," Dr. Miller murmured. "He's already forming." Attachments usually takes days or weeks with traumatized animals. "It's Sarah," Ellen said with certainty. "He senses her. Inus recognizes something familiar." The veterinarian nodded. "Animals operate on different perceptual levels than humans, particularly around scent and energy patterns. It's entirely possible he's recognizing familial connections through cues we can't consciously detect." As evening approached, preparations were made for Scout's overnight stay. Dr. Miller creating a comfortable space. In a quiet section of the clinic, away from other animals, a bed with Sarah's t-shirt for comfort, familiar toys for Margaret. A special meal designed to begin addressing his nutritional needs. "You can pick him up tomorrow around noon," the veterinarian explained, walking Robert and Ellen to the door. "Assuming all his blood work comes back clear, which I expect it will." Ellen hesitated, looking back at Scout, who watched them from his enclosure, his expression somehow knowing, as if he understood this. Separation was temporary. "Will he be all right after finding us while being alone? Distress him?" Dr. Miller smiled reassuringly. "He'll be fine, Mrs. Mitchell. This is a necessary step in his transition from wild to domestic again. He has Sarah's shirt, the familiar scents, and tomorrow he'll have his forever home with you." Driving home in the gathering twilight, Ellen and Robert found themselves discussing practical matters that suddenly required immediate attention. Puppy supplies, appropriate. Food, a crate, a bed. Toys, all the items Sarah had presumably purchased before her accident, but which hadn't been found among her belongings. "We should stop at the pet store," Robert suggested. "Get everything he'll need for tomorrow," Ellen agreed, her mind already racing with preparations. "We'll need to puppy-proof the house. It's been a long time since we've had a young dog." They spent the evening transforming their home, securing cabinet doors, removing potentially dangerous items from low shelves, creating a comfortable space in the living room with a new dog bed and toys, carefully selected to appeal to a German Shepherd, puppy's intelligence and energy. "Do you think he'll be happy with us?" Ellen asked, as they stood surveying their preparations. "We're not Sarah," Robert put his arm around her shoulders. "I think he'll sense that we loved her as much as he did, that we're completing the circle she began, and that's the next best thing to being with Sarah herself." The following morning dawned. Bright and clear, Robert and Ellen arriving at the clinic precisely at noon, eager yet apprehensive about bringing Scout home. Dr. Miller greeted them with good news. All tests had come back, showing Scout was fundamentally healthy, though slightly anemic from his nutritional challenges. "He's ready to go," the veterinarian announced, leading them to the examination room where Scout waited. He had a good night, ate well, no signs of distress. Scout recognized them immediately, rising from his bed, tail wagging tentatively, as Ellen approached, a marked difference from the frightened wild creature they had captured just yesterday. "Hello, sweet boy," Ellen murmured. kneeling to his level, ready to come home. To her delight, Scout moved forward, without hesitation pressing against her, seeking contact in a way that spoke of trust beginning to form. Robert joined them, Scout accepting his presence with equal ease, the three of them forming a new unit bound by their connection to Sarah. "I've prepared a care package," Dr. Miller said, handing Robert a bag of supplies, special food supplements for the next few weeks, detailed instructions for his care, and reintegration into domestic life appointments for follow-up visits, Ellen attached. The new leash they had purchased, a sturdy but comfortable design in Sarah's favorite color blue Scout, accepting it without protest, as if understanding this was part of his new reality. "One more thing before you go," Dr. Miller said, retrieving a small box from his desk. "Margaret Henderson dropped this off this morning. Thought you might want it now." Inside the box lay the tag Sarah had ordered for Scout, the silver disc engraved with "Scout and Sarah Forever," gleaming in the clinic's lights. Ellen lifted it carefully, a tangible connection to her daughter's intentions, her plans that would now be fulfilled differently than intended. But fulfilled nonetheless, may I? Dr. Miller offered, holding out his hand to attach the new tag alongside. The shelter-eyed that had helped them confirm Scout's identity as they prepared to leave the clinic, Scout walking calmly between them on his new leash. Ellen felt a profound sense of rightness. Despite the grief that still lingered, this was meant to be Sarah's final gift both to Scout and to them. A continuation rather than an ending. He'll still need time to adjust, Dr. Miller cautioned at the door. Don't be surprised by occasional setbacks, stress responses. He's been through extraordinary circumstances. Robert nodded. We'll be patient, give him all the time he needs. Outside in the bright sunshine, Scout paused, looking around with alert interest at this new chapter, beginning ears perked forward, tail wagging with more confidence. Ellen watched him taking in the world from this new perspective, no longer alone, no longer searching for someone lost, but found himself by those who shared his love for Sarah. "Welcome to the family, Scout," she whispered, as they walked together toward the car, toward home, toward a future none of them had anticipated, but which somehow felt like a miracle in the midst of their deepest grief. "Sarah would be so happy you found us." Scout's integration into the Mitchell household progressed with surprising smoothness. Over the following weeks, his intelligence and adaptability evident as he quickly learned the routines and expectations of his new home. There were challenges. Of course, moments when a sudden noise would startle him into temporary wildness, when he would search the house, whining softly as if looking for Sarah. But these episodes gradually decreased in frequency and intensity. Most remarkable was his attunement to Ellen and Robert's emotional states, his uncanny ability to offer comfort precisely when grief overwhelmed them, often appearing at Ellen's side, resting his head on her lap. When memories of Sarah brought tears, sometimes bringing Robert one of his toys when the silence in the house grew too heavy, as if understanding his role in their healing. "It's almost as if Sarah trained him," Ellen remarked one evening, as Scout lay between them on the couch, his head resting on Robert's leg while Ellen stroked his back, but she'd never had the chance. Robert nodded thoughtfully, or as if he somehow knows what we need instinctively. 1 month after bringing Scout home, Ellen decided it was finally time to tackle Sarah's bedroom, left largely untouched since her death, a shrine of sorts that had been too painful to dismantle, but which Ellen now felt ready to face with Scout by her side. "Will you help me?" she asked Robert over breakfast. "I think we should go through Sarah's things properly, not just preserve everything exactly as it was." Robert reached across the table, squeezing her hand, understanding the significance of this step. "Of course, whenever you're ready." They began that weekend, starting with Sarah's closet, sorting clothes for donation, keeping special pieces that held particular memories, Scout lying in the doorway, watching attentively, occasionally investigating items that carried Sarah's scent most strongly. sometimes carrying smaller objects to his bed as if collecting treasure selling. Worked methodically through drawers and shelves, organizing mementos, photographs, awards from Sarah's paramedic training, until she reached the bookshelf where several journals were stacked neatly on the bottom shelf, bound notebooks spanning years of Sarah's life. "I didn't know she still kept journals," Ellen said, lifting the most recent one, its cover decorated with painted wildflowers. "She started in middle school, but I thought she'd stopped years ago." Robert paused in his sorting. "She was?" Always private about her writing, even as a child, Ellen held the journal uncertainly. "Should we read them? It feels like an invasion of privacy, but also like she might have something to tell us," Robert finished. "Something we need to hear." After a moment's hesitation, Ellen opened the most recent journal, dated just months before Sarah's death, the familiar handwriting bringing an immediate tightness to her throat. Entries detailed Sarah's work as a paramedic, difficult cases, triumphant. Saves her volunteer hours at the shelter. Ordinary moments made extraordinary through her compassionate perspective. Then Ellen turned to an entry that made her breath catch. April 17th. "Tonight, we rescued a pregnant German Shepherd mix in terrible condition. Lisa called me for backup because the dog was frightened, aggressive. Everyone was worried about the puppies. I've never seen an animal so desperate." The fear in her eyes was heartbreaking. But there was determination, too. She was going to protect those babies, no matter what. Ellen began reading aloud, sharing the entry with Robert, who moved to sit beside her on Sarah's bed. Scout. Immediately alert at the sound of Sarah's words being spoken, he approached, resting his head on Ellen's knee, as if listening. The journal continued, documenting Stella's rescue, the birth of her puppies. Sarah's growing attachment to the runt she named Scout entries, filled with detailed observations of his development struggles, triumphs. Ellen and Robert listened to their daughter's voice emerging from the pages, discovering a part of her life they hadn't known. April 24th, Scout opened his eyes today, looking right at me as if he knew me, as if we'd been waiting to meet each other. Dr. Miller says it's normal imprinting behavior, but this feels different somehow. The connection. When he looks at me, it's like he sees something others don't like. We understand each other on some level beyond explanation. I know it sounds crazy, but I've never felt this kind of instant bond with an animal before. Scout whined softly at the mention of his name. His ears perked forward, following Ellen's voice with intense focus. She continued reading entries that documented his daily progress struggles with feeding competition with larger siblings. Sarah's determination to ensure he thrived. May 5th brought Scout home separately from the others. Today he needs the extra attention, and frankly, I need his company too. There's something healing about his presence. After the difficult shifts I've had lately, he fell, asleep on my chest, his tiny heart beating against mine, and I realized I haven't felt this peaceful in months. Maybe years. She was planning to adopt him. Even then, Robert observed, weeks before she officially asked Margaret. Ellen nodded, turning. Pages finding increasingly frequent mentions of Scout, his personality emerging, his distinctive behaviors. Sarah's growing conviction that he was meant to be hers permanently. May 18th, decided, today I'm going to adopt Scout officially, not just foster. The new apartment allows pets, and he's already claimed me as much as I've claimed him. I've never seen a puppy so attuned to human emotion. He knows when I'm sad before I do, brings me his toys, tries to make me laugh. I told Margaret today. She wasn't surprised, said she'd been expecting it. The way he follows me with his eyes, tracks my voice even from across the room. It's extraordinary. Scout shifted position as Ellen read, laying his head directly in her lap, his eyes never leaving. Her face as if he recognized the words, understood they were Sarah's thoughts about him. Ellen stroked his head, continuing through entries that detailed Sarah's preparations for adoption, purchasing supplies, researching training methods, planning his future in her home. Then came an entry that made Ellen pause, her voice faltering. A 30th. The strangest thing happened today. Scout and I were at the park. I was sitting under a tree while he explored nearby. Suddenly he froze, staring at something. I couldn't see hackles raised. Then he ran to me, pressing against my legs, whimpering. It was so unlike him. Usually he's fearless, curious about everything. When I looked around, I couldn't see anything threatening, but he wouldn't settle. Kept trying to pull me away from that spot, as if he sensed something dangerous. I've read about animals perceiving things humans can't: earthquake, tremors, approaching storms. But this felt different, like he was responding to something. Otherworldly, I know how that sounds, but there's no other way to describe it. Robert and Ellen exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. The entry was dated just 3 days before Sarah's fatal hiking accident. With trembling fingers, Ellen turned to the final entry in the journal, dated June 1st, 2 days before Sarah died. Her last written words: June 1st, picked up Scout's special tag today, Scout and Sarah forever. Maybe too sentimental, but it feels right. He's been acting strangely all week, following me everywhere, even more than usual, refusing to let me out of his sight, even sleeping pressed against my bedroom door. If I close it, Margaret says it's normal bonding behavior, but it feels more significant somehow. The way he watches me, sometimes with those intelligent eyes, like he knows something I don't like. He's trying to tell me something important. If I believed in such things, I might think he was trying to warn me, but of what? Tomorrow, I'm hiking Eagles Peak with Michael. One last adventure before our friendship transitions fully into something purely platonic. Scout seemed especially distressed when I packed my hiking gear, almost frantic, trying to stand between me and the door. Margaret has agreed to keep him until Saturday, when I'll pick him up for good, bring him home permanently. Can't wait to start our life together officially, though, in all the ways that matter. He's already mine, and I'm already his, forever connected by whatever mysterious force brought us together. Ellen closed the journal, unable to continue, tears streaming down her face. Robert's arm around her shoulders, Scout pressing against both of them, offering comfort in the face of these revelations. He knew, Ellen whispered. Somehow he sensed what was coming, tried to warn her. Robert didn't dismiss the possibility. Despite his scientific mind having witnessed Scout's extraordinary behavior, his seemingly impossible journey to find Sarah's grave, perhaps he did. The bond between them was clearly exceptional. Scout whined softly, licking Ellen's hand as if in confirmation, understanding the pain these discoveries brought, yet somehow also offering healing through the connection that remained, the love Sarah had given him now. Flowing back to her parents, Sarah's last entry, Ellen said finally. She said they were forever connected. That's why he went to her grave, why he kept returning. He was fulfilling that connection the only way he could. And now, Robert added gently, he's connecting us to her too, bringing her back to us in a different way. Ellen nodded, looking down at Scout, who gazed back with those intelligent eyes that Sarah had described so perfectly in her journal, eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond explanation, love beyond boundaries, understanding beyond words. Thank you, she whispered to him, for finding us, for bringing part of her back to us. Scout responded by pressing closer, as if to say he understood perfectly that this had been his mission all along, not just to find Sarah, but to eventually find those who had loved her, who needed the healing only he could provide, a mission that had begun. 6 months later, the morning light filtered through autumn leaves, casting dappled shadows across Pinewood Memorial Gardens as Ellen and Robert Mitchell walked the familiar path to their daughter's grave, Scout trotting confidently between them. His leash loose in Ellen's hand, no longer necessary but maintained as a formality for cemetery rules. The transformation in the once wild puppy was remarkable. His coat, now glossy, well-groomed, his body filled out to healthy proportions, his bearing that of a dog secure in his place in the world. Good morning, Sarah, Ellen said softly as they reached the gravesite, now adorned with fresh fall flowers and a small framed photograph of Sarah with newborn Scout. We've brought someone to see you. Scout needed no introduction or instruction, moving forward to sit precisely in the spot he had occupied daily during his months of faithful visits, his posture attentive, as if receiving communications only he could hear. After a moment, he placed his toy, a worn tennis ball, by the headstone, a ritual he maintained despite now having dozens of newer toys at home. Robert and Ellen had continued bringing Scout to visit Sarah's grave weekly, a compromise between honoring his remarkable devotion and establishing his new life with them, the cemetery staff particularly. Frank had welcomed these visits, watching with wonder as the story of the faithful puppy transformed from mystery to understood miracle. "We have news, Sarah," Robert said, settling. On the small bench they had donated to the cemetery positioned near her grave, the foundation is officially launching next month. The Sarah Mitchell Animal Rescue Foundation had begun as a simple idea during those first weeks after finding Scout, growing rapidly as Ellen and Robert channeled their grief into creating something meaningful that honored their daughter's compassion. The foundation would specialize in emergency medical care for injured strays, particularly pregnant animals, and orphaned puppies and kittens. The first rescue van is ready. Ellen continued reaching into her bag to show the photograph they had brought, fully equipped with emergency veterinary supplies. Specially trained staff, they're already taking calls from animal control and the shelter. Scout listened attentively as always during these one-sided conversations, his intelligent eyes moving between Ellen and Robert as they shared updates, his connection to Sarah seemingly allowing him to understand the significance of their words beyond what ordinary canine comprehension might permit. "Dr. Miller has agreed to be our chief veterinary advisor," Robert added, "and Margaret Henderson is heading our foster program. She says Stella is thriving in her forever home, even helps socialize new rescues." The foundation had quickly gained support from the community, many remembering Sarah from her paramedic work or shelter, volunteering donations, pouring in equipment services, volunteer hours, all offered in memory of the young woman whose compassion had touched so many lives, and whose story had spread through local media after Scout's remarkable vigil became known. "And Scout has been the perfect ambassador," Ellen said, smiling at the German shepherd who seemed to sit taller at the mention of his name. "Everyone wants to meet the miracle puppy. He's helped us raise more funds than we ever imagined possible." Indeed, Scout had become something of a local celebrity, accompanying Ellen and Robert to fundraising events, community gatherings, educational programs. His gentle nature and extraordinary story opening hearts and wallets. His intuitive ability to connect with traumatized animals proving invaluable in their rescue work. "We've helped 27 animals find homes already," Robert continued, "even before our official launch. The Hendersons' garage is temporarily serving as our headquarters until the new building is ready. The foundation headquarters, currently under construction, would feature state-of-the-art veterinary facilities, rehabilitation spaces, housing for animals awaiting adoption, and, most importantly, a special memorial garden where Sarah's story would be permanently displayed alongside Scout's, the tale of their connection, inspiring visitors for generations to come. As Robert and Ellen continued sharing updates, Scout suddenly stood alert, ears forward, gazing intently toward a cluster of trees nearby where movement had caught his attention. A moment later, Frank appeared walking slowly toward them. "Thought I might find you folks here," the caretaker said warmly. "Brought someone who wanted to meet Scout, if that's all right." Behind Frank walked a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, with leg braces and a tentative smile, her mother following close behind. "This is Maddie," Frank explained. "She's been visiting her grandmother's grave and heard about Scout's story." Ellen smiled, welcoming them. "Maddie, this is Scout. Would you like to meet him?" The girl nodded eagerly, though somewhat shyly. "Is it true he came here every day to visit? By himself?" "Every single day," Robert confirmed. "Rain or shine, he never missed." Maddie looked at Scout with wonder. "My mom says he must have really loved her." "A whole lot, he did." Ellen agreed. And he still does, just in a different way now. Scout watched the exchange patiently, then, without prompting, approached Maddie, gently pressing against her leg in a gesture of greeting, offering comfort, as he somehow sensed her need for connection. The girl's tentative hand reaching to stroke his head, her face lighting with delight. "He's so soft," she whispered. "And his eyes, they're so." Knowing, Ellen nodded, understanding exactly what Maddie meant. Scout has a special gift for knowing who needs him. That's why he's such a good therapy dog now. Indeed, Scout's formal certification as a therapy dog had been another unexpected development. His intuitive empathy making him exceptionally suited for work with trauma patients, grieving families, children with disabilities, hospitals, and nursing homes, now regularly requesting his visits after Maddie and her mother continued on their way. Frank stayed behind. "Cemetery Board asked me to let you know they've approved your request for the memorial bench installation. We can schedule it whenever you're ready." The bench, a companion to the one already in place, would complete the small meditation area. They had envisioned a space where visitors could sit, reflect on Sarah's story and Scout's devotion, perhaps finding comfort for their own grief in this testament to love that transcended ordinary boundaries as they prepared to leave. Scout performed one final ritual, circling Sarah's grave 3 times before sitting briefly, closing his eyes as if in communion with a presence only he could sense, then rising ready to continue his day, his mission, both fulfilled and ongoing, walking. Back to their car, Ellen reflected on the transformation of the past 6 months, how finding Scout had changed not just their daily lives, but their entire approach to grief, opening a pathway to healing none of them could have anticipated. "You know," Robert said thoughtfully as they drove away from the cemetery, "sometimes I think Sarah orchestrated all of this somehow." Ellen glanced at Scout sitting attentively in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the cemetery until it disappeared from view. "What do you mean?" "Rescue work was always her passion," Robert explained. "Now we're continuing it on a scale she never could have managed alone. It's as if her death, as tragic as it was, became a catalyst for something larger." Ellen considered this, and Scout was the messenger, the connection that made it possible. In the back seat, Scout shifted his attention to them, ears perked as if following their conversation, understanding its significance. The foundation will help hundreds, maybe thousands, of animals over time, Robert continued, all because one puppy refused to give up on finding his person. Even after death, Ellen reached back to stroke Scout's head. Sarah wrote that they were connected forever by some mysterious force that brought them together. I think that force is still at work through him, through us, through everyone touched by their story. As they turned onto the road leading to the animal shelter where they were scheduled to evaluate new rescue candidates, Scout sat, taller alertness and purpose evident in his posture, ready for the work ahead, the legacy he carried forward. His mission evolved, but not ended. Ellen thought of Sarah's journal, her daughter's final written words, the bond she had described with Scout, a connection that defied explanation, that persisted beyond physical presence, beyond life itself. There was comfort in this continuity, this thread that remained unbroken despite everything that had been lost. "A new beginning," she murmured, watching Scout in the rearview mirror, his intelligent eyes meeting hers with that uncanny understanding. For all of us, Scout whined softly in agreement, as if to say he had known all along that this was the plan, that his faithful visits to Sarah's grave had been just the beginning of a journey that would transform grief into purpose, pain into healing, loss into legacy. The mystery of how a small German Shepherd puppy had found his way to Sarah's grave each day would never be fully explained, but perhaps some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, only experienced, cherished, as reminders that love in its purest form transcends all boundaries, even the final one between life and death. And in that transcendence, sometimes the most broken hearts find their way to becoming whole again, different than before, but whole nonetheless, ready to carry forward the love that death can never truly end.